The snow fell in whispers that November morning, each flake settling on the cracked pavement of Millfield, Ohio, like a secret waiting to be told. Detective Sarah Chen stood outside the abandoned Miller textile factory, her breath forming small clouds in the frozen air, and felt the weight of 12 years pressing against her chest. The building loomed before her, its broken windows like hollow eyes that had witnessed something terrible and kept silent ever since. It was 2012, and the case of Audrey Ramirez had never truly left this town. It lived in the spaces between conversations, in the way mothers pulled their daughters closer when walking past certain streets, in the memorial bench outside the high school that bore a brass plaque with her name and the years that bracketed a life cut impossibly short, 1982 to 2000. 18 years old. A whole universe contained in those two numbers. Sarah had been just a patrol officer back then, fresh out of the academy, when Audrey disappeared on a cold October night. She remembered the search parties, the desperate flyers stapled to every telephone pole, the way Audrey's mother, Rosa Ramirez, had stood in the police station day after day, her hands clutching a worn photograph of her daughter, refusing to believe that silence meant anything final. Now, Sarah was lead detective, and the call that had come in 3 hours ago had changed everything. A construction crew demolishing the old factory's east wing had found something behind a false wall in the basement. Not something. Someone. The medical examiner's van was already there, parked at an angle that suggested urgency. Sarah could see Dr. Marcus Webb through the open back doors, his silver hair catching the pale morning light as he prepared his equipment with the methodical care of someone who had learned to treat death with dignity. Detective Chen. The voice belonged to Officer James Kowalski, a local kid who had graduated from Millfield High 5 years after Audrey disappeared. He approached with careful steps, his face pale. "You're going to want to see this before we move anything." Sarah followed him through the factory's main entrance, where the smell of rust and decay immediately filled her lungs. The building had been abandoned for 15 years, ever since the textile industry collapsed and took half the town's jobs with it. Graffiti covered the walls in layers, each generation of teenagers leaving their mark on the bones of their parents' broken dreams. They descended into the basement, where temporary lights had been strung up, casting harsh shadows across water-stained concrete and exposed pipes. A group of construction workers stood clustered near the far wall, their hard hats in their hands, faces drawn with the particular horror of ordinary people who had stumbled into something extraordinary. The false wall had been partially demolished, revealing a small room, barely 8 feet by 8 feet. And there, in the corner, was what remained of Audrey Ramirez. Sarah had seen death before, too many times, but there was something about this that made her throat tighten. The skeleton was curled in a fetal position, still wearing the remnants of what had once been a red jacket. Sarah recognized it from the missing person reports, from the countless interviews. Audrey's favorite jacket, the one her abuela had sent from Mexico, the one with the embroidered flowers along the collar. But it was what lay next to the remains that made Sarah's heart skip. A leather journal, surprisingly well-preserved in the dry basement air, and a small silver locket, the chain still intact, lying open to reveal 2 tiny photographs inside. "Nobody touches anything else until Dr. Webb and forensics process the entire scene," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "James, I need you to contact Rosa Ramirez. Tell her we may have found Audrey. Be gentle. After 12 years, hope can hurt as much as grief." As the team began their meticulous work, Sarah stepped back, letting her eyes sweep the room. This wasn't just a disposal site. Someone had built this false wall specifically, deliberately. The construction was too careful, too planned. Whoever had put Audrey here had intended for her to stay hidden forever. The factory had been operational in 2000. Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through the old case files she'd digitized years ago, unwilling to let the case grow cold in her mind, even when the official investigation had stalled. The factory had employed over 200 people back then. The owner, Richard Brennan, had sold the property in 1997 to a development company that never developed anything, just let the building rot. "Detective." Dr. Webb's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He stood near the remains, his gloved hands holding something small and metallic. Preliminary observation suggests the victim has been here since time of death. No signs of movement post-mortem. But there's something else. These. He held up what looked like several small pieces of plastic, each about the size of a fingernail. They were clutched in the victim's hand. Lab will confirm, but they look like fragments of an ID badge. The kind with embedded security strips. Sarah felt something click in her mind. The factory had used ID badges. Every employee had one. She'd seen them in the old photographs during the initial investigation. "Bag everything," she said. "And tell forensics I want DNA comparisons run against anyone who worked at this factory between 1995 and 2000. All of them." As she climbed back up the basement stairs and emerged into the gray November morning, Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd called 100 times over the years. It rang 4 times before a tired voice answered. "Rosa? It's Detective Chen. I need you to sit down. We found her. We found Audrey." The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 7 seconds. Sarah counted them. Then came the sound of sobbing, raw and broken and somehow relieved all at once, and Sarah had to close her eyes against the wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her professional composure. "I'm coming to you," Sarah said. "I'm bringing Father Miguel. We'll tell you everything we know. Rosa, listen to me. After all these years, we're going to find out what happened. I promise you that." She ended the call and stood there in the snow, watching it accumulate on her shoulders, on the hood of her car, on the abandoned factory that had kept its terrible secret for 12 years. Somewhere in this town, someone had woken up this morning thinking they'd gotten away with murder. They had gone to work, or made breakfast, or kissed someone goodbye, believing the past was buried deep enough to stay buried. They were wrong. Sarah looked down at her phone and pulled up the photograph she'd carried in her case files all these years. Audrey Ramirez smiled back at her, full of life and possibility, standing in her graduation gown outside Millfield High School. Valedictorian. Full scholarship to Ohio State. Dreams of becoming a civil rights lawyer. All of it stolen in one night. "I'm sorry it took so long," Sarah whispered to the photograph. "But we're going to bring you home now. And we're going to make sure everyone knows your name and what happened to you, and that you mattered. God, Audrey, you mattered so much." The snow continued to fall as emergency vehicles began arriving, as the forensics team assembled, as news vans pulled up and reporters scrambled to get the story that would dominate every news cycle in Ohio for the next several weeks. The town of Millfield, population 15,000, was about to be thrust into a spotlight it had never wanted, forced to confront a truth it had tried to forget. And somewhere, in a modest house on Maple Street where papal picado still hung in the windows and the scent of Rosa's homemade tortillas still filled the kitchen every Sunday, a mother was finally getting an answer to the question that had haunted her for 4,380 days. But answers, Sarah knew, were just the beginning. The real question was, who had taken Audrey Ramirez from this world, and why? And how had they managed to hide the truth for 12 years in a town where everyone knew everyone else's business? The journal. Sarah's mind kept returning to it. If Audrey had managed to leave something behind, some record of what had happened, then maybe this case wouldn't stay cold much longer. Maybe, after all this time, justice was finally thawing. Audrey Ramirez had been the kind of person who left light wherever she went. That's what everyone said afterward. In those terrible weeks and months when the search parties disbanded and hope began to curdle into resignation. But Sarah had learned through years of detective work that the brightest lights often cast the deepest shadows. And it was in those shadows that truth usually hid. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. She sat now in Rosa Ramirez's living room, the same room she'd sat in 100 times over the past 12 years. But this time was different. This time she wasn't bringing vague leads or disappointing updates. This time she was bringing closure, even if it came wrapped in fresh grief. Rosa sat in her armchair by the window, the one that faced the street, the one where she'd spent countless evenings watching for a daughter who would never walk through that door again. Her hands trembled as she held a cup of tea that Father Miguel had prepared, the steam rising in delicate spirals between them. "Tell me about her," Sarah said softly. "Not the Audrey everyone knew, the one only you saw." the one who existed in the quiet moments. Rosa's eyes, red-rimmed but clear, met Sarah's. You've asked me this before. I know, but I need to hear it again. Now that we've found her, I need to understand who we're fighting for. Father Miguel, who had baptized Audrey 18 years ago and said her memorial service 12 years ago, sat quietly in the corner, his rosary beads moving slowly through his weathered fingers. He had been the Ramirez family's anchor through the storm, the one who had sat with Rosa through the darkest nights when grief threatened to swallow her whole. Rosa set down her tea and stood, walking to the mantel where photographs covered every available surface. She picked up one that Sarah had seen countless times. Audrey at age 7, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a trophy from the school spelling bee. She was always so determined. Rosa began, her voice carrying the weight of memory. Even as a little girl, when her father left us, Audrey was only 5. She told me, "Mama, don't cry. I'll take care of you." 5 years old, and already trying to be strong for everyone else. Sarah pulled out her notebook, not because she needed to take notes, but because the act of writing helped her focus, helped her see patterns in the chaos of human experience. She worked 3 jobs that last year, Rosa continued. Everyone knew she had the scholarship to Ohio State, full ride, but she still worked. The coffee shop on Main Street, tutoring at the library, and weekend shifts at Henderson's grocery store. I told her she didn't need to, that the scholarship covered everything, but she said she wanted to save money for books, for emergencies. She said she wanted to send some money home to me. She was supposed to leave for college in January, Father Miguel added quietly. She deferred her enrollment by 1 semester to save more money. Always thinking ahead. That girl. Sarah flipped through her old notes, landing on a page she'd marked months after Audrey's disappearance. Her friends said she'd been stressed that last month. October 2000. Do you remember anything specific? Rosa's face clouded. She wouldn't talk about it. But yes, something was bothering her. She'd come home late from her shifts, and I could tell she'd been crying. When I asked, she'd just say she was tired, that it was nothing. But a mother knows. A mother always knows. Did she mention anyone specific? Any problems at work? She loved the coffee shop and the library, Rosa said carefully. But the grocery store, there was something. She almost quit in September, but then she said she'd worked it out, that everything was fine. But she was different after that. More quiet. She started keeping a journal around that time. She'd never been much for writing before, but suddenly she was filling pages every night. The journal. Sarah had sent it to the forensics lab for processing, but she'd seen enough of it before it was bagged as evidence to know that it might be the key to everything. The entries were dated, starting in early September 2000 and continuing right up until October 14th, the day Audrey disappeared. Mrs. Ramirez, I need to ask you something difficult. Did Audrey ever mention feeling unsafe? Did she ever say anyone was bothering her, watching her, making her uncomfortable? Rosa closed her eyes, and Sarah could see the war happening behind them. The desire to help versus the instinct to protect her daughter's memory. To not speak ill of the dead or invite speculation that Audrey had somehow brought this on herself. There was a manager at Henderson's, Rosa finally said. Mr. Brennan's nephew, I think. Thomas Brennan. Audrey said he made comments sometimes about how she looked, about her body. She told him to stop, and he did mostly, but she said he'd find reasons to schedule them for closing shifts together. She hated those nights. Sarah's pen froze on the page. Thomas Brennan. She knew that name. He'd been interviewed during the initial investigation. Everyone who worked at Henderson's had been, but he'd had an alibi for the night of October 14th. He'd been at a bar in Columbus with friends, or so he'd claimed. She'd need to pull those files, look at them again with fresh eyes. Tell me about that last day, Sarah said gently. October 14th, 2000. Walk me through it. Rosa's hands tightened around her teacup. It was a Saturday. She had a morning shift at the coffee shop, came home for lunch, did some studying. She was taking a paralegal class at the community college, trying to get a head start before Ohio State. She made me pozole for dinner. We ate together right here at this table. She told me about a book she was reading about Cesar Chavez and the farm workers movement. Her eyes lit up when she talked about justice, about standing up for people who had no voice. What time did she leave? 6:30. Her shift at Henderson's started at 7. She was closing that night, supposed to be home by 11. Rosa's voice cracked. By midnight, I was calling everyone. By 1 a.m., I was at the police station. They told me to wait 24 hours, that teenagers sometimes stayed out late, that she probably went to a party. But Audrey wasn't like that. She always called. Always. Father Miguel moved to sit beside Rosa, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Sarah, I talked to Audrey the day before she disappeared. Friday afternoon. She came to the church, asked if we could speak privately. She seemed troubled. Sarah leaned forward. This was new information. What did she tell you? She asked me about moral obligations, he said slowly. About what you do when you know something wrong is happening, but speaking up might cost you everything you've worked for. I asked her what was troubling her, but she said she wasn't ready to talk about it yet. She wanted to be sure before she accused anyone of anything. I told her that the truth always matters, even when it's costly. I told her to trust in God and do what was right. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall, the same clock that had been ticking when Audrey was alive, when this house was full of her laughter and her dreams and her fierce determination to make the world better. Did she say accuse? Sarah asked. Did she use that specific word? Father Miguel nodded. She did. She said, Father, if I accuse someone of doing something terrible, and I'm wrong, I could ruin their life. But if I'm right and I say nothing, then I'm letting something terrible continue. Those were her words. I've carried them with me every day since she disappeared. Sarah's mind raced. Audrey had known something. She'd witnessed something, or discovered something, and she'd been wrestling with what to do about it. The journal entries would tell them what, but the pattern was becoming clear. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was something specific, something targeted. Did she mention Henderson's grocery store? Or anyone who worked there? No, she kept it vague. I assumed it was something at school, or maybe she'd seen something in the neighborhood. But now, Father Miguel's voice trailed off, heavy with regret. Now I wonder if I'd pressed harder, if I'd insisted she tell me everything that day, whether she'd still be alive. You can't think like that, Rosa said, her voice surprisingly firm. Audrey made her own choices. She was brave. Too brave, maybe. If someone killed her because she knew something, because she was going to speak up, then that's on them. Not on you. Not on anyone who loved her. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at Maple Street. It was early afternoon now, and the snow had stopped. Children were playing in the accumulation, building a snowman in the yard across the street. Life continuing, oblivious to the tragedy being unraveled in this house. Tell me about her dreams, Sarah said, not turning around. What did Audrey want from life? Rosa's voice softened, became almost dreamlike. She wanted to be a lawyer, but not the kind who makes a lot of money. She wanted to help people who couldn't afford justice. She talked about immigration rights, about workers' rights. She'd say, Mama, there are so many people like us, people who work hard and play by the rules but still get crushed by the system. Someone has to stand up for them. She tutored kids at the library for free, Father Miguel added. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening. Children of immigrant families, mostly, helping them with English, with homework. She'd stay late, make sure they understood everything before they left. Some of those kids are adults now, and they still talk about Miss Audrey, about how she believed in them when no one else did. Sarah turned back to face them. I'm going to find out who took her from you, from all of us, and I'm going to make sure they face every consequence the law allows. But I need your help. I need you to think, both of you, about anyone Audrey mentioned in those last few weeks. Any name, any place, any strange comment or odd interaction. The smallest detail might be the one that breaks this case open. Rosa stood and walked to a closet, reaching up to the top shelf. She pulled down a cardboard box, worn at the edges, and brought it to the coffee table. These are Audrey's things. The police gave them back to me after the investigation stalled. Her backpack, her school notebooks, papers from work. I've kept them exactly as they were. I couldn't bring myself to go through them, but maybe now. Maybe they'll help. Sarah carefully opened the box, and the scent of Audrey's perfume, faint but unmistakable after 12 years, wafted up. Inside were the ordinary artifacts of a young woman's life. Textbooks, a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird with notes in the margins, a work schedule from Henderson's grocery store, pay stubs, movie ticket stubs, a mixtape someone had made her with Audrey's power songs written on the label. At the bottom of the box, Sarah found a folder labeled College Stuff. Inside were Audrey's acceptance letter to Ohio State, scholarship information, and a handwritten list titled Things to Do Before I Leave. Sarah read down the list, her heart aching at the mundane beauty of it. Teach Mama how to use email so we can stay in touch. Find someone to take over my Tuesday/Thursday tutoring. Buy new winter coat. Columbus is colder. Make a photo album of Millfield so I don't forget home. Talk to Detective Wilkins about the thing at work. Sarah's breath caught. Rosa, did you see this? Number 5. She was planning to talk to a detective. Rosa leaned over, squinting at her daughter's handwriting. Detective Wilkins. He worked at the station back then. I remember him from when I filed the missing person report. He retired in 2004, Sarah said, her mind already racing ahead. Moved to Florida. But he might remember if Audrey ever reached out to him. This is huge. This means she wasn't just thinking about coming forward. She decided who to talk to. Father Miguel stood, his face troubled. Sarah, if Audrey was killed because she was going to speak to the police about something, then whoever did this knew. They knew she was a threat. Which means it was someone close to her, Sarah finished. Someone who knew her routine, her plans. Someone she trusted enough to be alone with. The three of them sat in silence, the weight of that realization settling over them like the snow outside. Somewhere in this town, someone had murdered an 18-year-old girl to keep a secret. They'd walled up her body in a basement and gone on living their life, attending church, raising families, celebrating holidays, all while knowing what they'd done. I need to go, Sarah said, carefully repacking Audrey's things. I need to track down Detective Wilkins, and I need to see what forensics has found. But I'll be back. And Rosa, Father Miguel, thank you for trusting me with this, for trusting me with Audrey's story. As Sarah drove away from the house on Maple Street, she glanced in her rearview mirror and saw Rosa standing at the window, watching her leave, just as she'd watched for Audrey all those years. But something had changed in Rosa's posture. The hopeless slump of grief had been replaced by something straighter, stronger. Purpose. After 12 years of not knowing, the search for answers had begun again. And this time, Sarah thought as she turned onto Main Street and headed toward the station. This time they were going to find them. Every single one. The coffee shop where Audrey had worked was still there, rebranded and under new ownership but occupying the same corner location. Sarah pulled over and sat for a moment, watching people come and go through the doors, living their ordinary lives. Had Audrey stood behind that counter, serving lattes and pastries, while knowing something terrible? Had she smiled at customers while her mind churned with the weight of a secret she was trying to figure out how to tell? Sarah's phone rang. It was Dr. Webb. Tell me you have something, she answered. Preliminary DNA results are back. The remains are definitely Audrey Ramirez, matched against the DNA samples her mother provided 12 years ago. But there's more. We found trace DNA under her fingernails. She fought back, Sarah. And we have her attacker's DNA. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling a surge of fierce satisfaction. How soon can we run it against the employee database from Henderson's? Already in process. If any of those employees are in the system, arrests, military service, anything that would put them in a database, we'll have a match by tomorrow morning. What about the journal? Forensics is photographing every page. Should have it all digitized and sent to you within the hour. Sarah, I've read some of it. It's damning. She documented everything. Dates, times, conversations. If even half of what she wrote is true, Someone was running something very illegal out of that grocery store. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What kind of illegal? Read it yourself. But Sarah, be careful. Whatever she uncovered, it was big enough to kill for. And in a town this small, whoever did this is still here. Still watching. After hanging up, Sarah sat in her car and looked out at Millfield's main street. The town looked innocent in the afternoon light. The church steeple rising above bare trees, the pharmacy with its faded awning, the diner where everyone knew your name and your order. But innocence, Sarah had learned, was often just a thin veneer overwrought. Somewhere in this town, a killer was going about their day. Maybe they were at work right now. Maybe they were having lunch with friends or picking up their kids from school or standing in line at the bank. They looked like everyone else. They smiled and made small talk and paid their taxes. But at night, when they closed their eyes, what did they see? Did they see Audrey's face? Did they hear her voice? Did they remember the moment they decided that their secret was worth more than her life? Sarah started the engine. It was time to find out. The digital copy of Audrey's journal arrived in Sarah's email at 3:47 p.m., and by 4:15, she'd called an emergency meeting with her entire investigative team. The conference room at Millfield Police Department felt too small for what they were about to discuss. The fluorescent lights too harsh, the air too close. Detective Mike Torres sat across from her, his notebook already open. He'd transferred to Millfield from Cleveland 3 years ago, bringing with him experience in organized crime that had seemed almost comically unnecessary in a town this small. Now, Sarah was grateful for his presence. Officer James Kowalski was there, along with Officer Rebecca Hart, who'd been the first responder to Rosa Ramirez's frantic call 12 years ago. Rebecca was close to retirement now, but her eyes were sharp as she waited for Sarah to speak. "Before I share what's in this journal," Sarah began, "I need everyone to understand something. What Audrey Ramirez discovered got her killed. Which means whoever killed her has spent 12 years thinking they got away with it. They've had 12 years to establish lives, build alibis, develop networks. Confronting this is going to be dangerous, not just for us, but for anyone who helps us." She pulled up the first page of the journal on the large screen. Audrey's handwriting was neat, precise, the writing of someone who'd been taught that details mattered. September 3rd, 2000. Started closing shifts at Henderson's this week. Mr. B's nephew Thomas is the night manager now. He makes me uncomfortable, always standing too close, commenting on what I'm wearing. But it's good money and I need it for school. Something weird happened tonight though. After we closed and I was restocking the pharmacy section, I saw Thomas and another man in Mr. B's office. The door was mostly closed, but I could hear them arguing about the shipments and keeping things quiet. When they noticed me, they stopped talking immediately. Thomas came out and asked me how long I'd been there. His voice was different, harder, scared me a little. "Henderson's grocery store," Mike said, leaning forward. "Still in business?" "No," Rebecca answered. "Closed in 2002. Financial troubles, or so Richard Brennan claimed. The building's been empty ever since. Used to be there was talk of turning it into a community center. But that never happened." Sarah scrolled to the next entry. September 10th, 2000. "I stayed late tonight to reorganize the stockroom like Thomas asked. Except when I went to the back storage area, there were boxes there that aren't on any inventory list. I know because I helped update the inventory system last month. These boxes had pharmaceutical company labels, but they were stacked weird, like someone was hiding them behind the regular stock. I didn't touch anything. I just left. But when I got to the front, Thomas was waiting by the door. "Find everything you needed?" he asked. The way he looked at me, like he was warning me about something. "I think something bad is happening at this store. I think Mr. B might be involved. I don't know what to do." The room was silent except for the hum of the heating system kicking on. Sarah let them absorb the information, watching understanding dawn on their faces. "Pharmaceutical theft," Mike said quietly. "Classic operation. Small-town pharmacy, lacks oversight, medications diverted and sold on the black market. OxyContin was just starting to become a major problem in 2000. Street value was astronomical. Sarah nodded and advanced to another entry. This one dated September 24th. I've been keeping track. Every Thursday night, a truck comes to the back loading dock around 10 p.m. It's not a regular delivery truck, wrong time, wrong company logo. I've watched from the storage room window 3 times now. Thomas and another man, I think his name is Derek. He doesn't work at the store, but I've seen him in Mr. B's office. Unload boxes and take them directly to the pharmacy stockroom, but they don't log them into the system. Last Thursday, I tried to see what was in one of the boxes. I waited until Thomas went to the bathroom and used my key to the pharmacy area. Pain medication. Dozens of bottles. OxyContin, Vicodin, Percocet. Way more than we should have, and none of it's in the computer. Mr. B is definitely involved. I saw him there last week watching the unloading. He saw me at the window and I swear he smiled, like he was daring me to say something. I'm scared, but I keep thinking about all those people in my community who can't afford prescriptions, who struggle to pay for medicine they need, and these people are stealing drugs to sell to addicts? It's wrong. It's all wrong. I'm going to document everything. If something happens to me, there needs to be a record. Rebecca Hart made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. She knew. God in heaven, that child knew they were going to kill her, and she kept documenting. Because she was brave, James said, his young face pale but determined. Because she cared more about doing the right thing than protecting herself. Sarah advanced through several more entries, each one detailing Audrey's careful documentation. She'd taken photographs with a disposable camera, though those had never been found. She'd copied down license plate numbers of trucks, names of people she'd seen coming and going, dates and times of deliveries. She'd essentially built a criminal case, all while working minimum wage and planning for college and tutoring kids at the library. The entry from October 12th made Sarah's hands shake. I finally know the full scope of it. I overheard Thomas and Derek talking tonight. They weren't just stealing medication, they've been doing this for years. Since 1997, maybe earlier. Mr. B started it after the factory closed and he needed to make up for lost revenue. His wife inherited Henderson's from her father, so he couldn't sell it, but it wasn't making enough money. They have connections in Columbus and Cincinnati. They've been supplying half of southern Ohio, thousands of pills, millions of dollars, and they've been so careful, paying off inspectors, doctoring records, making it look legitimate. Derek said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "Anyone who gets curious doesn't stay curious for long." Thomas laughed. They were talking about someone named Miguel Torres. I don't know who that is, but Derek said he asked too many questions and took a fall at the factory. Thomas said, "Accidents happen. I need to go to the police. I've decided. Detective Wilkins seems like a good man. Father Miguel said I should trust my conscience. But I'm going to wait until after my shift on Saturday. I want to get one more documentation of the Thursday night delivery. I want to have everything perfect so there's no chance they can talk their way out of this." Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. 2 more days. Then I'm bringing all of this to Detective Wilkins and they can't hurt anyone else. Mike Torres had gone completely still. "Miguel Torres," he said, his voice strange. "That was my uncle. He died in 2000. Fall at the Miller Textile Factory. They said he was drunk, that he climbed onto a catwalk that wasn't safe. My family never believed it. Miguel didn't drink. He was careful, professional. But there was no evidence of foul play, so the case was closed." Sarah reached across the table and gripped his hand. "I'm sorry, Mike. We're going to reopen that case too. We're going to find out exactly what happened." "But Audrey never made it to Detective Wilkins," Rebecca said. "She disappeared on Saturday, October 14th, her closing shift at Henderson's. And she never documented that Thursday night delivery," James added. "October 12th was Thursday. She planned to work Saturday and then go to the police. But Friday something changed." Sarah pulled up the final entry. It was dated October 13th, Friday, the day before Audrey disappeared. The handwriting was shakier, written quickly. "They know. I don't know how, but they know I've been watching, documenting. Thomas cornered me in the stockroom tonight. He said, "You should be careful, Audrey. Curious girls sometimes get hurt." He touched my face and I froze. I couldn't move. He said, "It would be a shame if something happened to you before you got to go to that fancy college." When I got home, Mama asked if I was okay and I lied. I said I was fine. But I'm not fine. I'm terrified. I'm not waiting until Sunday. Tomorrow after my shift, I'm going straight to Detective Wilkins' house if I have to. I'm bringing this journal, my photographs, everything. Even if they fire me, even if it costs me my job, I can't wait anymore. If you're reading this and something has happened to me, please know that I tried to do the right thing. Please make sure Thomas Brennan and Richard Brennan and Derek, don't know his last name, white male, 30s, scar on his left hand, drives a blue pickup with license plate HBR 4719, face justice. Please make sure my mama knows I love her. Please don't let them get away with this. The conference room was thick with silence when Sarah turned off the screen. For police officers, for people who had chosen careers in law enforcement because they believed in justice, sat staring at evidence that an 18-year-old girl had done their job for them and paid for it with her life. "We have their names," Sarah finally said. "We have documentation. We have Audrey's testimony from beyond the grave. Now we need to build a case that will stand up in court." "Richard Brennan is still in town," Rebecca said. "Lives in that big house on Elm Street. President of the Rotary Club. Biggest donor to the new hospital wing. Thomas Brennan moved to Columbus in 2003, James added, already pulling up information on his laptop. Works in pharmaceutical sales, ironically enough. Married, 2 kids. No criminal record." "And Derek?" Mike asked. "That license. Plate number," Sarah said, already typing. "HBR 4719. Let me run it through the database." The search took less than 30 seconds. Derek Holloway, 3 arrests between 1998 and 2001, 2 for possession with intent to distribute, 1 for assault. Released on technicalities or plea deals each time. Last known address was in Millfield, but he moved in 2002. Current location. Sarah scrolled down. Cincinnati. Works at a trucking company. The same trucking company that serviced Henderson's grocery store, Mike said, pulling up his own records. "I'm looking at the old business licenses now. Henderson's used Holloway Transport LLC for deliveries from 1997 to 2002. Derek Holloway was the owner. The pieces were falling into place with the horrible clarity of a crime that had been carefully planned but not carefully enough. These men had thought they were smart. They'd thought that hiding Audrey's body behind a false wall in an abandoned factory would keep their secret forever. They hadn't counted on demolition crews. They hadn't counted on progress literally tearing down their lies. "We need warrants," Sarah said, "for all 3 men. Phone records, financial records, DNA samples. Mike, can you reach out to Columbus PD and Cincinnati PD? We'll need their cooperation for the arrests." "Already on it," Mike said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. The death of his uncle had just transformed from a painful family mystery into a murder investigation, and Sarah could see the barely controlled fury in his eyes. "James, Rebecca, I need you to pull everything from the Miller Textile Factory accident in 2000. Every report, every photograph, every interview. If Miguel Torres was murdered, there will be evidence. These guys weren't professionals. They made mistakes." "What about Detective Wilkins?" Rebecca asked. "Should we try to contact him in Florida?" Sarah nodded. "I'll call him myself. He needs to know that Audrey was trying to reach him. He needs to know she trusted him with this." The team dispersed, each member moving with the urgent energy of people who knew they were racing against time. Because even though 12 years had passed, the clock was ticking now. Once word got out that Audrey's body had been found, and in a town like Millfield, that news would spread like wildfire. The suspects would know. They'd lawyer up, destroy evidence, coordinate their stories. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed the number she'd looked up for Detective Robert Wilkins. It rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Wilkins. Detective Wilkins, this is Detective Sarah Chen from Millfield PD in Ohio. I'm calling about a cold case from 2000. Audrey Ramirez. The silence on the other end lasted so long that Sarah thought the call had dropped. Then, you found her. Yes, sir. This morning. And Detective Wilkins. She was trying to reach you. The day before she disappeared, she wrote in her journal that she was going to bring you evidence of a major drug operation. Another long silence. When Wilkins spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. I knew that girl, bright as they come. When her mama reported her missing, I worked that case day and night for months. But we had nothing. No body, no witnesses, no evidence. She just vanished. She didn't vanish, Sarah said quietly. She was murdered, and she left us everything we need to prove it. Her journal documented a prescription drug theft ring operating out of Henderson's grocery store. Richard Brennan, Thomas Brennan, and Derek Holloway. Son of a bitch, Wilkins breathed. Richard Brennan. I always thought there was something off about that guy. Too smooth, too careful. But he had money, influence. Half the town council was in his pocket. Still is, Sarah confirmed. Which is why I need to ask you. When you investigated Audrey's disappearance, did anyone interfere, pressure you to drop it, steer you in the wrong direction? Mayor Talbot, Wilkins said immediately. He called me into his office about 3 weeks into the investigation. Said the town was suffering, that the publicity was hurting local businesses. He suggested maybe Audrey had run away, started a new life somewhere. Said I should scale back the search. I told him where he could stick his suggestions, but after that I got stonewalled. Budget cuts, reassignments, pressure from the chief. By the time I retired, the case was officially cold. Mayor Talbot is still mayor, Sarah said. And he's up for re-election next year. Detective Wilkins, how deep do you think this corruption goes? In a town that size? Could be anywhere. Could be anyone. Sarah? Can I call you Sarah? You need to be careful. If Brennan had enough juice to kill that girl and cover it up for 12 years, he's got resources. He's got people who owe him favors. You start shaking this tree, a lot of rotten fruit is going to fall out. I'm counting on it, Sarah said. After ending the call, she sat alone in the conference room and looked at the board where James had started pinning evidence. Photographs of the factory basement, copies of Audrey's journal entries, a timeline of events. In the center was a photograph of Audrey, the same one Rosa kept on her mantle. Those bright eyes, that confident smile, that sense of someone who believed the world could be better if people just tried hard enough. I'm going to get them, Sarah whispered to the photograph. All of them. Every person who hurt you, who covered it up, who profited from your silence. I promise you that. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Webb. DNA match from under Audrey's fingernails. Thomas Brennan. He's in the system, DUI arrest in 2005. It's him, Sarah. We have him. Sarah felt a surge of fierce satisfaction. Physical evidence. DNA. The kind of proof that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. Thomas Brennan's DNA under Audrey Ramirez's fingernails meant only one thing. He'd been there when she died. He'd been close enough for her to scratch him, to fight back, to leave a piece of him behind for justice to find 12 years later. She forwarded the text to Mike Torres and the district attorney's office, then began drafting the warrant applications. They'd need to move fast. Arrest all 3 men simultaneously so they couldn't warn each other or coordinate their defense. At 6:47 p.m., Sarah's phone rang. It was Captain Morrison, her supervisor, his voice tense. My office. Now. She found him standing at his window, looking out at the parking lot where news vans were already gathering. The story had broken. Someone, maybe one of the construction workers, maybe someone at the medical examiner's office, had leaked that a body had been found at the factory. Tell me you have this under control, Morrison said without turning around. We have DNA evidence, a detailed journal documenting the crime and motive, and testimony from 3 suspects. We'll have arrests by tomorrow morning. Richard Brennan's lawyer called me 10 minutes ago, Morrison said. Wants to know if his client is being investigated. Also got a call from Mayor Talbot. He's concerned about the direction of the investigation and wants a meeting. Of course he does, Sarah said. Because he knows what we're going to find. Captain, with respect, Richard Brennan killed Audrey Ramirez to cover up a massive drug operation. And I think Mayor Talbot knew about it then and has been helping cover it up ever since. Morrison finally turned to face her. He was a good man, Sarah knew. Honest, dedicated. But he was also 2 years from retirement and acutely aware of his pension. Are you sure about this? He asked. Because once you arrest Richard Brennan, once you accuse the mayor of corruption, there's no walking it back. This department will be under a microscope. Your career, my career, everyone's career. I'm sure, Sarah said firmly. And Captain? Audrey Ramirez was 18 years old. She worked 3 jobs, tutored kids for free, had a full scholarship to college. She saw something wrong and tried to report it. They killed her for it. They walled up her body and went on living their lives. For 12 years, Rosa Ramirez has wondered what happened to her daughter. For 12 years, she's lived with that hole in her life. We have a chance to give her answers. We have a chance to give Audrey justice. I'm taking that chance, with or without support. Morrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Get your warrants. Make your arrests. But Sarah, document everything. Triple-check every piece of evidence. Because these people will have the best lawyers money can buy, and they'll attack every aspect of this investigation. Already planning on it, Sarah said. By midnight, the warrants were signed. By 2 a.m., Sarah had coordinated with Columbus and Cincinnati police departments. And at 6 a.m. on November 8, 2012, 12 years and 25 days after Audrey Ramirez disappeared, 3 simultaneous arrests were made. Thomas Brennan was taken into custody at his home in Columbus, emerging from his suburban house in handcuffs, while his wife screamed and his children watched from an upstairs window. The neighborhood, all neat lawns and minivans and basketball hoops, had no idea that the friendly pharmaceutical sales rep who coached Little League had murdered a teenage girl. Derek Holloway was arrested at his trucking company in Cincinnati, caught in the act of loading a shipment. He ran, making it about 50 yards before being tackled by officers. In his truck, they found current shipments of diverted pharmaceuticals, evidence that the operation had never really stopped, just moved locations and gotten smarter. And Richard Brennan was arrested at his mansion on Elm Street in Millfield, in front of half the town who had gathered when word spread that something was happening. He stood on his front porch in an expensive suit, completely calm, and said clearly for all the news cameras, "This is a witch hunt. I am an innocent man being persecuted for political reasons." Audrey disappeared. This is from the factory's north entrance. Watch. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. On the screen, 2 figures emerged from a dark sedan. Miguel Torres and another man. Their faces clear in the parking lot lights. They appeared to be arguing. Then the second man pushed Miguel, who stumbled backward. The argument continued for another minute before both men went inside the building. "Now watch this," Mike said, fast-forwarding. At 12:23 a.m., only one person comes back out. Sarah watched as the second man emerged alone, moving quickly to his car and driving away. Miguel Torres never appeared. And here's where it gets interesting, Mike continued, zooming in on the car's license plate. That vehicle was registered to Holloway Transport LLC. Same company that serviced Henderson's grocery store. Same company owned by Derek Holloway. Miguel Torres was investigating them, Sarah breathed. He must have worked at the factory and seen something, the trucks, the late-night meetings, something that made him suspicious. He confronted Derek Holloway and Holloway killed him. Gets better, Mike said grimly. Or worse, depending on your perspective. I pulled Miguel's employment records. He was a maintenance supervisor at Miller Textile. Part of his job was overseeing building security and maintenance access. He would have had keys to every room in that factory, including the room where Audrey was hidden, Sarah finished. Mike, what if Miguel discovered the space where they were storing diverted pharmaceuticals? What if that's why they killed him? And then 3 weeks later, when Audrey started asking questions, they used that same space for her. Mike's voice was tight with controlled rage. They killed my uncle to protect their operation, and when that didn't scare people off, they killed a teenage girl. Sarah pulled out her phone and called the district attorney. Laura? I need to add charges. We're looking at 2 homicides now, not 1. Miguel Torres in 2000. And I think we can prove Mayor Talbot was complicit in covering both of them up. The DA, Laura Simmons, was quiet for a moment. Sarah, accusing a sitting mayor of corruption and accessory to murder is exactly what the evidence supports, Sarah interrupted. Audrey Ramirez was going to expose a drug operation. She was murdered. Detective Wilkins was pressured by Mayor Talbot to stop investigating. The case went cold. 12 years later, we find her body and suddenly Mayor Talbot is calling the police captain, trying to interfere with the investigation again. He's either complicit or incredibly stupid, and nothing about his political career suggests stupidity. Get me proof, Laura said finally. Not circumstantial evidence, not suspicious timing, actual proof. Phone records, financial transactions, testimony. Something that will stand up in court. Already working on it, Sarah said. Over the next 3 days, the investigation exploded outward like ripples from a stone thrown in still water. Thomas Brennan, faced with his own DNA under Audrey's fingernails and the detailed journal entries documenting his involvement, decided to cooperate. His lawyer negotiated a deal. Full testimony against Richard Brennan and Derek Holloway in exchange for a reduced sentence. What Thomas Brennan revealed was worse than anyone had imagined. The prescription drug operation had started in 1996, not 1997. It had involved not just Henderson's grocery store but 3 other pharmacies across southern Ohio. The total amount of diverted medication was valued at over $15 million. And the list of people who had known about it or benefited from it included a state pharmacy inspector, 2 city council members, and yes, Mayor James Talbot. Talbot got $20,000 in 1998. Thomas Brennan told investigators, his voice flat and defeated. Campaign contribution officially, but everyone knew what it really was. Payment to look the other way. To make sure the police department didn't investigate too closely. To protect Uncle Richard's interests. And what about Audrey Ramirez? Sarah asked, keeping her voice level despite the fury burning in her chest. Tell me about October 14, 2000. Thomas Brennan's hands shook as he reached for the water glass on the table. She was supposed to work closing shift. Just her and me. I knew she'd been snooping around, taking photographs. Derek had seen her at the window during a Thursday night delivery. Uncle Richard said we had to handle it. Handle it, Sarah repeated. You mean murder an 18-year-old girl? I didn't want to. Thomas's voice rose, defensive. I told them we should just fire her, scare her, something. But Uncle Richard said she knew too much. Said she'd ruin everything we'd built. He said it had to look like she ran away. Like she just disappeared. Kids do that all the time. So what did you do? I closed the store early. Told her there was a problem with the inventory system, that we needed to go to the factory to check on some stored records. She believed me. Why wouldn't she? I was her manager. She trusted me. He started crying then, ugly sobs that shook his shoulders. Derek was waiting at the factory. I didn't know he was going to. I didn't know it would be that way. What way? Sarah pressed. He grabbed her as soon as we got inside. She fought. God, she fought so hard. Scratched my arms, my face. Kept screaming about how we couldn't do this, how people would find out, how her mother would never stop looking for her. Derek hit her. Multiple times. And then Thomas Brennan couldn't continue. And then he strangled her. Sarah finished coldly. While you watched. I didn't watch. I turned away. I couldn't. But you helped hide the body. You helped build that false wall in the basement. You helped seal Audrey Ramirez inside that room, and then you went on with your life. You got married. You had children. You coached Little League. All while knowing what you'd done. Thomas Brennan had no answer to that. There was no answer that would make it better, that would justify what he'd helped do to a girl who had simply wanted to do the right thing. Armed with Thomas Brennan's testimony, investigators obtained warrants for Mayor Talbot's financial records. What they found was a trail of suspicious payments, shell companies, and campaign contributions that all led back to Richard Brennan. 20,000 in 1998, 50,000 in 2003, another 30,000 in 2008. Mayor Talbot had been on Richard Brennan's payroll for 14 years. On November 15, 2012, Mayor James Talbot was arrested at his office in City Hall. Unlike Richard Brennan's calm demeanor, Talbot fell apart immediately, denying everything even as the evidence was presented to him. "I didn't know about any murder," he insisted, his face red and sweating. "I took campaign contributions. That's not illegal. Lots of people support my campaigns." "You took bribes," Laura Simmons corrected, her voice ice-cold. "And when Audrey Ramirez was murdered, you actively interfered with the police investigation to protect the man who'd been paying you off. That makes you an accessory after the fact. You helped a killer go free for 12 years. I didn't know she was murdered. I thought she ran away. You pressured Detective Wilkins to stop investigating. You cut his budget, reassigned his resources, suggested publicly that Audrey had run away when her family was begging for help finding her. You knew Mayor Talbot. You knew exactly what you were protecting." The mayor's arrest sent shockwaves through Millfield. The town that had seemed so stable, so wholesome, suddenly felt like ground that might give way at any moment. If the mayor was corrupt, who else was? How deep did this rot go? The answer came over the following weeks as the investigation widened. The state pharmacy inspector who had overlooked irregularities at Henderson's grocery store resigned in disgrace. 2 city council members who had received payments from Brennan were censured and forced out of office. The owner of another pharmacy where drugs had been diverted was arrested. It was like watching a tower of cards collapse, each falling piece revealing another underneath. And at the center of it all, driving everything, was the memory of Audrey Ramirez, the girl who had seen something wrong and tried to speak up, and paid the ultimate price. The trial began on March 4, 2013, almost 5 months after Audrey's body was discovered. The courtroom in the county seat was packed every single day, with overflow crowds watching on monitors in adjacent rooms. News crews from Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati set up permanent camps outside, broadcasting live updates. The case had captured national attention. A story about corruption, murder, and one young woman's courage resonating far beyond the borders of small-town Ohio. Rosa Ramirez sat in the front row every day, wearing a different photograph of Audrey pinned to her coat. Sometimes it was Audrey at age 5, gap-toothed and grinning. Sometimes it was her high school graduation photo. Sometimes it was a candid shot of her at the library, surrounded by the children she tutored, her face lit up with joy. Rosa wanted the jury to see her daughter not just as a victim, but as a person, vibrant, alive, full of potential. Sarah sat beside her whenever she wasn't testifying, her hand resting on Rosa's shoulder during the hardest moments. Father Miguel was there too, and Detective Wilkins had flown in from Florida, unwilling to miss seeing justice finally served. The prosecution, led by Laura Simmons, was methodical and devastating. They presented Audrey's journal, each entry read aloud in the courtroom, her words echoing through the space with the power of truth. They presented the DNA evidence, Thomas Brennan's genetic material under Audrey's fingernails, proof that he'd been there when she died. They presented financial records showing the scope of the drug operation and Mayor Talbot's complicity. And they presented Thomas Brennan himself, who had agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. He took the stand on the 4th day of the trial, looking like he'd aged a decade in the past few months. His wife had divorced him. His children refused to see him. His comfortable suburban life had evaporated the moment handcuffs closed around his wrists. "Tell the jury what happened on October 14, 2000, Laura Simmons said. Thomas Brennan's voice was barely above a whisper. The judge asked him to speak up. He tried again, louder this time, and told the story of how they'd murdered Audrey Ramirez. Every detail, the lies he'd told to get her to the factory, the way Derek Holloway had attacked her, the sound of her screams, the feel of her blood on his hands as he helped build the wall that would hide her body. Rosa Ramirez wept silently throughout the testimony. Sarah held her hand, feeling the tremors that ran through the older woman's body as she heard the truth of her daughter's final moments. It was brutal. It was necessary. And it was finally the truth. Richard Brennan's defense attorney tried to discredit Thomas's testimony, suggesting he was lying to reduce his own sentence. But the physical evidence supported every word. The DNA, the journal, the false wall constructed with materials traced back to purchases made by Holloway Transport LLC. The security footage showing Derek Holloway at the factory the night Audrey disappeared. Derek Holloway had refused to testify or cooperate. He sat at the defense table, glaring at everyone, his lawyer arguing that the evidence was circumstantial, that his client was being railroaded. But the jury had seen Audrey's journal entries describing Derek, his truck, his license plate. They'd heard Thomas Brennan's testimony. They'd seen the security footage of Derek entering the factory with Audrey and leaving alone. Mayor Talbot had been severed into a separate trial, but he sat in the courtroom most days, watching his world crumble. His political career was over. His reputation was destroyed, and he faced decades in prison for obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact to murder. On March 18th, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom was so silent you could have heard a pin drop as the foreperson stood. In the case of the state of Ohio versus Richard Brennan, on the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of drug trafficking, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of racketeering, we find the defendant guilty. Rosa Ramirez collapsed into Sarah's arms, sobbing with relief and grief intertwined so tightly they were indistinguishable. Audrey had been gone for 12 years. A guilty verdict couldn't bring her back. But it meant something. It meant her death hadn't been swept under the rug, forgotten, dismissed as just another missing teenager who probably ran away. In the case of the state of Ohio versus Derek Holloway, on the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Derek Holloway showed no emotion, but his lawyer's shoulders slumped. Murder in the first degree carried a mandatory sentence of life in prison. There would be no parole, no second chances. In the case of the state of Ohio versus Thomas Brennan, on the charge of murder in the second degree, we find the defendant guilty. Thomas Brennan put his face in his hands. His reduced charge, negotiated as part of his cooperation agreement, meant he might see freedom again someday. But that day was decades away, and he would live every one of those years knowing what he'd done, knowing that his cowardice had cost a brilliant young woman her life. The sentencing hearing 3 weeks later was when the community finally had their say. Over 30 people testified about how Audrey's murder and the subsequent cover-up had affected them. The children she'd tutored, now young adults, spoke about how she'd believed in them when no one else did. Her classmates talked about her kindness, her intelligence, her unwavering sense of justice. Rosa took the stand last, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "My daughter was 18 years old when she died," she said. 18. She should have gone to college. She should have become a lawyer, helped people, made the world better. She should have fallen in love, gotten married, given me grandchildren. She should have had a life. Instead, she saw something wrong and tried to report it. And you men decided your money, your operation, your secrets were worth more than her life. You took everything from her. You took everything from me. And then you went on living like nothing had happened. Like she was nothing. But she wasn't nothing. She was everything. And now the world knows her name. Now everyone knows what she tried to do, how brave she was, how much she mattered. You tried to silence her, but she's speaking louder now than she ever could have in life. That's her justice. That's her legacy. Judge Martha Hernandez, a woman known for her stern demeanor and strict adherence to the law, wiped her eyes before pronouncing sentence. Richard Brennan, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Derek Holloway, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Thomas Brennan, you are sentenced to 30 years in prison. May you spend every day of those sentences thinking about Audrey Ramirez and the life you stole from her. As the defendants were led away in chains, the courtroom erupted in applause. It was unprecedented. but Judge Hernandez let it continue for a full minute before calling for order. Some moments her expression seemed to say, "Deserve to be marked." Outside the courthouse, Rosa Ramirez stood before a sea of microphones and cameras. She'd prepared a statement, working on it with Sarah and Father Miguel for days. Her hands shook as she unfolded the paper, but her voice was clear. "My name is Rosa Ramirez, and I am the mother of Audrey Elena Ramirez, who was murdered on October 14, 2000, when she was just 18 years old. For 12 years, I didn't know what happened to my baby. For 12 years, I lived with the hope that maybe she was alive somewhere, and the fear that she wasn't. For 12 years, I wondered if anyone would ever care enough to find out the truth. Today, justice was served. But this isn't just about my Audrey. This is about every young person who sees something wrong and wonders if they should speak up. This is about what happens when corruption is allowed to flourish in the darkness. This is about remembering that every life matters, especially those who have the courage to stand up for what's right. I want to thank Detective Sarah Chen, who never forgot my daughter, who never stopped believing we deserved answers. I want to thank Detective Mike Torres, whose own family tragedy helped bring the truth to light. I want to thank everyone in this community who supported us, who remembered Audrey, who refused to let her death be swept aside. And I want to say to anyone watching this who has information about a crime, who knows something wrong is happening, speak up. Yes, it might be scary. Yes, there might be consequences. But silence protects the guilty and condemns the innocent. My Audrey knew that. She knew it might cost her everything, and she spoke up anyway. That's the kind of person she was. So tonight, I'm going home to the house where Audrey grew up, and I'm going to light a candle for her, and I'm going to thank God that she was my daughter. And I'm going to promise her that her death meant something, that her courage changed things, that she's never going to be forgotten. The crowd that had gathered, hundreds of people from Millfield and beyond, erupted in applause again. Someone started singing De Colores, a Mexican folk song that had been one of Audrey's favorites, and others joined in until the courthouse steps were filled with music and tears and something that felt like healing, or at least the beginning of it. Sarah stood to the side, watching Rosa become someone new. Not just a grieving mother, but a voice for justice, an advocate, a symbol of resilience. Over the coming months, Rosa would channel her grief into activism. She'd start a foundation in Audrey's name, providing scholarships for young people interested in criminal justice and civil rights. She'd speak at schools, at community centers, at conferences, telling Audrey's story and encouraging others to speak truth to power. But that night, after the crowds dispersed and the news crews packed up, Sarah drove Rosa home and sat with her in the quiet house on Maple Street. They didn't talk much. Sometimes there were no words adequate to the moment. They just sat together, two women who had been changed forever by knowing Audrey Ramirez, even though one had never met her in life. "She would have liked you," Rosa finally said, breaking the comfortable silence. "You're exactly the kind of detective she dreamed of becoming. Someone who doesn't give up, who fights for people who can't fight for themselves." "I wish I could have known her," Sarah said honestly. "I wish I could have protected her." "You did protect her," Rosa corrected gently. "You protected her memory, her truth, her legacy. You made sure she wasn't just another cold case, another file gathering dust. You made sure everyone knows her name. That's protection too, Mija. That's love." 3 years later, Sarah stood in front of Millfield High School, watching as they unveiled a new memorial. Not just a bench this time, but a full scholarship program in Audrey's name, funded by the Audrey Ramirez Justice Foundation that Rosa had built from grief and determination. The scholarship would send one deserving student to college every year, fully paid, with preference given to those pursuing careers in law, criminal justice, or social work. The ceremony was attended by the same children Audrey had tutored, now young adults themselves, many of them college graduates. They spoke about how she'd changed their lives, how she'd believed in them when they didn't believe in themselves, how her memory had inspired them to pursue education, to fight for justice, to never stay silent in the face of wrong. Mike Torres was there too, promoted to captain after the corruption purge that followed the trial. His Uncle Miguel's death had been officially ruled a homicide, The case finally closed with Derek Holloway convicted for that murder as well. The Miller Textile Factory, scene of so much tragedy, had finally been demolished and rebuilt as a community center. They'd named it the Torres Ramirez Justice Center, honoring both Miguel and Audrey. As Sarah looked around at the crowd, at Rosa, who'd found purpose in her pain, at Father Miguel, who'd channeled his grief into expanded community outreach, at the countless lives touched by one young woman's courage, she thought about how justice worked in mysterious ways. Audrey Ramirez had been silenced at 18, but her voice echoed louder now than it ever could have if she'd lived. Her journal had been published, with proceeds going to her foundation. Her story had been featured in documentaries, podcasts, news specials. Schools across Ohio used her case to teach students about whistleblower protections, about standing up to corruption, about the importance of speaking truth. The men who'd killed her were spending the rest of their lives in prison. The system that had protected them had been dismantled, and the town of Millfield, forced to confront its own complicity in looking the other way, had transformed itself into a model of transparency and accountability. Detective Chen? A young woman approached, maybe 20 years old, holding a worn copy of Audrey's journal. I just wanted to thank you. I'm Maria. I was one of the kids Audrey tutored at the library. I'm graduating from Ohio State next month with a degree in criminal justice. Because of her. Because of what you did to find the truth. Sarah smiled, feeling the familiar tightness in her throat that came whenever she was reminded of Audrey's ripple effect. She'd be so proud of you, Maria. Congratulations. I'm going to be a detective too, Maria said, her eyes bright with determination. I'm going to make sure other families get the answers they deserve, just like you did for Mrs. Rosa. After the ceremony, Sarah found herself standing alone at the original memorial bench, running her fingers over Audrey's name engraved in brass. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the school grounds where Audrey had once walked, laughed, dreamed of changing the world. We did it, Sarah whispered. We found you. We told your story. And you're still here, Audrey. In every scholarship recipient, in every kid who decides to speak up instead of staying silent, in every person who chooses courage over comfort. You're still here. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, and for just a moment Sarah could almost hear it. A young woman's voice, bright and determined, saying what she'd written in her journal all those years ago. Please don't let them get away with this. They hadn't, and they never would. 5 years after the trial, Rosa Ramirez stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., testifying before a congressional committee about whistleblower protections and the need for stronger laws protecting young people who report workplace violations. She'd become a nationally recognized advocate, her foundation now operating in 12 states, having awarded over 100 scholarships. My daughter died because she tried to do the right thing, Rosa told the assembled senators and representatives. She died because the system failed her, because there were no protections for a young woman working minimum wage who saw something illegal and wanted to report it. She died because powerful people valued money over human life. But her death doesn't have to be meaningless. We can change these laws. We can protect the next Audrey Ramirez. That's why I'm here. That's why I'll keep telling her story until things change. The legislation that eventually passed, the Audrey Ramirez Whistleblower Protection Act, provided specific safeguards for workers under the age of 25 who reported illegal activities. It mandated anonymous reporting systems, protected employees from retaliation, and created a federal fund to support whistleblowers who faced financial hardship as a result of speaking up. President Obama signed it into law on what would have been Audrey's 33rd birthday, with Rosa standing beside him. The photograph of that moment, Rosa's hand on the signed bill, tears streaming down her face, Audrey's graduation photo visible in a locket around her neck, became iconic, representing the long journey from grief to meaningful change. 10 years after Audrey's body was discovered, Millfield held a commemoration ceremony. The town had transformed in the decade since the truth came out. The old Henderson's grocery store building had been converted into a legal aid clinic, offering free services to low-income families. The Audrey Ramirez Justice Foundation headquarters occupied space downtown, its walls covered with photographs of scholarship recipients and the accomplishments they'd achieved. Sarah, now chief of detectives, stood before the crowd gathered in the town square. 10 years ago, we found Audrey Ramirez, she said. And in finding her, we found ourselves. We found the courage to confront hard truths, to hold powerful people accountable, to admit that we'd failed her while she was alive but could honor her in death. This town is better because Audrey lived. This town is stronger because we finally listened to what she was trying to tell us. The memorial they unveiled that day was stunning. A bronze statue of a young woman, journal in hand, looking toward the horizon with determination and hope. The plaque beneath it read, Audrey Elena Ramirez, 1982 to 2000. The truth always matters, even when it's costly. Her courage changed a community. Her voice will never be silenced. Rosa stood before the statue for a long time after the ceremony ended, one hand resting on the bronze shoulder as if comforting her daughter. She was 68 now, her hair silver, her face lined with the years of grief and healing. But there was peace in her expression, not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. I wish you could see all of this, Mija, she whispered. All the lives you've touched, all the good that's come from your bravery. I wish you could meet all these kids you've helped. See the clinic where people get justice in your name. I wish, her voice broke. I wish you were here. Father Miguel, now semi-retired but still a constant presence in the community, joined her. She is here, Rosa. In every person who chooses to speak up instead of staying silent. In every life changed by her foundation. In every law student who studies her case and decides to fight for justice. She's here. 15 years after the cold case was solved, Maria Rodriguez, the little girl Audrey had tutored at the library, was promoted to detective in the Columbus Police Department. She'd specialized in cold cases, crediting Audrey's story as her inspiration. In her office, she kept a framed photograph of Audrey alongside her own detective's badge. I solve cases that everyone else gave up on, Maria told a reporter doing a story on the Ramirez legacy. Because I learned from Audrey that every victim deserves justice, no matter how much time has passed. Every family deserves answers. Every voice deserves to be heard. Maria had reopened and solved 7 cold cases in her career, bringing closure to families who'd waited years or decades for the truth. Each time she closed a case, she sent a copy of the final report to the Audrey Ramirez Justice Foundation, a private ritual honoring the woman who'd changed her life without even knowing it. 20 years after Audrey's murder, Rosa Ramirez passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 78. The funeral was attended by hundreds, scholarship recipients, advocates, law enforcement officers, politicians, and countless people whose lives had been touched by Audrey's story and Rosa's tireless work. She was buried next to her daughter in Millfield Cemetery, their headstones side by side. At Rosa's request, her epitaph was simple. Rosa Maria Ramirez, mother of Audrey. She turned grief into hope, and silence into song. Sarah Chen, now retired and working as a consultant on cold cases across Ohio, spoke at the funeral. Rosa Ramirez taught us that a mother's love never gives up, she said. That grief can be transformed into purpose. That one person's determination can change systems, inspire movements, save lives. She taught us that justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied. And she taught us that her daughter's voice, Audrey's voice, would echo through generations. The Audrey Ramirez Justice Foundation continued under new leadership, expanding its mission to include advocacy for victims' families, support for whistleblowers, and criminal justice reform. By its 20th anniversary, it had awarded over 500 scholarships, helped pass legislation in 30 states, and provided support to thousands of families seeking justice for loved ones. 25 years after the cold case was solved, a documentary filmmaker interviewed everyone involved in Audrey's story who was still living. Thomas Brennan, now 68 and still incarcerated, agreed to speak on camera for the first time since his trial. I think about her every day, he said, his face haggard, eyes hollow. Every single day for 25 years. What she could have become, what she could have done. The kids she could have helped, the cases she could have won, the family she could have had. I took all. Memories of Audrey instead. Derek Holloway was still incarcerated, having never shown remorse or acknowledged his crimes. He'd become a cautionary tale, the man so committed to protecting his illegal operation that he'd murdered 2 people and destroyed countless lives, only to spend his own life in a cage. 30 years after the breakthrough that shocked Millfield, the town gathered once again at Audrey's memorial statue. The scholarship program had now sent over 800 students to college. 3 of them had become judges. 12 were prosecutors. 27 worked in law enforcement. Dozens more were social workers, advocates, nonprofit leaders, all of them carrying forward Audrey's vision of a more just world. Sarah Chen, now 81, spoke briefly at the ceremony, her voice still strong despite her age. I started this investigation 30 years ago because a construction crew found a body. But what we really found was a voice that had been silenced but never truly quiet. Audrey Ramirez spoke truth to power when she was 18 years old, and she's still speaking now, through every person she's inspired, every law that bears her name, every family that gets justice because someone refused to give up. The current police chief, a woman who'd been in elementary school when Audrey was murdered, added, "We teach every new officer about this case, not just as a cautionary tale about corruption, but as a reminder of why we do this job. We protect the Audreys of the world. We listen to the voices that powerful people want silenced. We never, ever give up on finding the truth." As the sun set over Millfield that evening, children played in the shadow of Audrey's statue, their laughter filling the square. The town had been transformed by tragedy into something better, stronger, more just. The corruption that had nearly destroyed it had been rooted out and replaced with transparency, accountability, and a fierce commitment to protecting whistleblowers and victims. In homes across the country, scholarship recipients named in Audrey's honor were studying late into the night, preparing for careers in justice. In prisons, 3 men spent another night living with the consequences of their choices. In heaven or whatever lay beyond, perhaps Audrey and Rosa were finally reunited, watching over the legacy they'd built from courage and grief. And in Millfield, Ohio, in a house that had once been filled with Rosa's lonely vigil, a new family now lived. The mother, an attorney who worked at the legal aid clinic in the old Henderson's building, had a daughter who wanted to be a detective when she grew up. She'd read about Audrey Ramirez in school and been inspired by a girl who'd been brave enough to speak up even when it cost her everything. "Mom," the girl asked one evening, "do you think I could be like Audrey someday? Someone who makes a difference?" Her mother smiled, thinking of the scholarship check she'd received that had made law school possible, the foundation that had believed in her when she'd had nothing but dreams. "Sweetheart, we can all be like Audrey, every time we choose to speak up instead of staying silent. Every time we choose justice over comfort. Every time we refuse to let powerful people get away with wrong. That's Audrey's legacy. And yes, you can carry it forward." That night, as stars appeared over Millfield, the bronze statue gleamed in the lamplight, a permanent reminder of a girl who'd seen something wrong and tried to make it right. Her journal was in the Library of Congress now, preserved for history. Her story was taught in criminal justice programs across the country. Her name was spoken with reverence and respect. Audrey Elena Ramirez, 18 years old, murdered for trying to do the right thing. But her voice, her voice echoed on and on, refusing to be forgotten, inspiring generation after generation to choose courage, to fight corruption, to speak truth no matter the cost. The cold case had been solved. Justice had been served. But more than that, a life cut short had become a legacy that would never end. In the darkest moment of her death, Audrey had left behind light enough to illuminate countless paths forward. And in Millfield, Ohio, a small town that had learned the hardest lessons about silence and complicity and the cost of looking away, that light still burned bright, a beacon reminding everyone who saw it that truth matters, that courage changes the world, and that every voice deserves to be heard. 35 years after Audrey's body was discovered, the Audrey Ramirez Justice Foundation celebrated a milestone that would have seemed impossible in those dark days of 2012. Its 1,000th scholarship recipient. The ceremony was held not in Millfield, but at the Ohio State Capitol, a testament to how far Audrey's influence had spread. The recipient was a young man named Carlos Martinez, a first-generation college student from a small town in rural Ohio who'd witnessed wage theft at his father's workplace and reported it. Despite threats and intimidation, his courage had resulted in an investigation that recovered over $200,000 in stolen wages for farm workers across 3 counties. When asked why he'd spoken up despite the risks, Carlos had a simple answer: "I read about Audrey Ramirez in school. If she could be brave, so could I." The governor of Ohio, herself a former prosecutor who'd worked on corruption cases inspired by Audrey's story, spoke at the ceremony. Audrey Ramirez died in 2000, but her impact grows stronger with each passing year. This foundation has now sent 1,000 young people to college, young people who might never have had that opportunity otherwise. But more than that, it's created a culture of accountability. It's taught generations that speaking up isn't just noble, it's necessary. That silence protects the guilty and condemns the innocent. She paused, looking out at the crowd that filled the Capitol rotunda. I keep a photograph of Audrey in my office, not to remind me of tragedy, but to remind me of possibility. She was 18 years old when she documented a massive criminal operation with nothing but a journal and a camera. She had no special training, no resources, no powerful connections. She just had courage and a moral compass that pointed true north. If we could bottle what she had and give it to every young person in America, imagine what we could accomplish. The audience erupted in applause. Among them sat former Detective Mike Torres, now 71, who'd made the trip from Arizona where he'd retired 5 years earlier. Beside him was his daughter, also named Audrey, born 2 years after the case was solved, named in honor of the girl whose investigation had given his family closure about his uncle's death. "Dad," young Audrey Torres whispered during the ceremony, "do you think the original Audrey knows about all of this?" Mike squeezed his daughter's hand. "I think she knows. I think wherever she is, she's proud. Not of what happened to her, but of what came after. Of every person who refused to stay silent because of her example." After the formal ceremony, a smaller gathering was held at the Ohio State campus, in a study lounge that had been dedicated to Audrey's memory 15 years earlier. The walls were covered with photographs, Audrey as a child, as a teenager, as a high school graduate. But surrounding those images were hundreds of others. Scholarship recipients at their graduations, at their first day of work, at their weddings, with their own children. A family tree of people connected by one girl's courage. Maria Rodriguez, now a retired police captain who'd solved 43 cold cases during her career, stood before the gathered crowd. At 55, she was still the little girl who'd been tutored by Audrey at the library, still carried that memory like a torch. "I've been thinking a lot lately about legacy," Maria began, "about what we leave behind when we're gone. Audrey Ramirez lived for 18 years. That's such a short time. I'm 3 times that age now, and I still feel like I'm just getting started. But in those 18 years, Audrey touched so many lives. She tutored kids like me. She worked hard to support her mother. She saved money to help others. And at the end, she saw something wrong and refused to look away, even knowing the cost might be high." Maria's voice grew stronger. "I've spent my career finding people who were lost, bringing answers to families who waited years, decades sometimes, for the truth. And every single time I closed a cold case, I thought about Audrey, about how she'd been lost for 12 years, about how Detective Chen never gave up, about how Rosa Ramirez turned her grief into a movement." She pulled out a worn photograph, the same image of Audrey she'd kept on her desk throughout her career. "This picture traveled with me to every crime scene, every interview, every late night in the office. It reminded me why the work mattered. Why every victim deserves justice, no matter how much time has passed. Why every family deserves answers." The room was silent except for the soft sound of people crying. These were Audrey's children, in a sense not biological but spiritual. People who'd been shaped by her story, inspired by her courage, given opportunities through her foundation. A young woman in the back raised her hand. "Ms. Rodriguez, did you ever feel scared? Doing the work you did, knowing what happened to Audrey when she spoke up?" Maria smiled sadly. Every single day. Fear is part of courage. If you're not afraid, you don't need to be brave. But I learned something from Audrey's story. Silence is more dangerous than speaking up. Silence lets corruption flourish. Silence protects abusers. Silence kills. So yes, I was scared. But I spoke up anyway. I investigated anyway. I pushed for truth anyway. Because that's what Audrey taught me. As the evening wound down, the scholarship recipients past and present mingled, sharing stories of how the foundation had changed their lives. Doctors, lawyers, social workers, teachers, police officers, journalists. All of them connected by the invisible thread of Audrey's legacy. One of them, a civil rights attorney named Jennifer Wu who'd received her scholarship 15 years earlier, approached the microphone during the open sharing time. "I need to tell you all something," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Last month, I won a case against a major corporation that had been stealing wages from immigrant workers. The settlement was $12 million, returned to workers who'd been exploited for years. When the judge announced the verdict, I thought about Audrey, about how she'd wanted to be a civil rights lawyer, about how she dreamed of helping people who had no voice." Jennifer held up a copy of Audrey's published journal, its cover worn from use. "I keep this with me. I read it before every major case, because it reminds me what's at stake. Real people, real lives, real justice. Not just legal theory or courtroom strategy, but actual human beings who deserve dignity and fairness." That's what Audrey understood at 18. That's what she died defending. And that's what I wake up fighting for every single day. The applause was thunderous. This was Audrey's true legacy. Not just scholarships or laws or memorials, but people. Living, breathing people who carried her vision forward into the world. Who fought battles she'd never gotten the chance to fight. Who won victories in her name. Outside the study lounge, on the Ohio State campus where Audrey had been scheduled to begin classes in January 2001, students hurried between buildings, most of them unaware of the gathering happening or the story behind it. But in classrooms across campus, professors still taught about the Ramirez case. In the law school library, her journal was required reading for students studying whistleblower protections and public interest law. And in one freshman dorm room, a young woman named Audrey, the fourth person to be named after the original since the case was solved, was studying criminal justice, preparing for a career in law enforcement. She'd grown up hearing the story, had been named specifically because her parents wanted her to embody that same courage and integrity. Now, at 18, the same age Audrey Ramirez had been when she died, this new Audrey was choosing to walk a similar path. "Do you ever feel like it's too much pressure?" her roommate asked one night. Being named after someone so famous, so brave? The young Audrey considered this. "Sometimes, but mostly I feel honored. Like I've been given a gift. A reminder of what's possible when you refuse to stay silent. My parents told me that the original Audrey didn't set out to be a hero. She just saw something wrong and tried to make it right. That's not about being special or extraordinary. It's about being human, being decent. Anyone can do that. Would you do what she did? If you saw something illegal, something dangerous?" "Yes," the young Audrey said without hesitation. "Absolutely yes, because now we have protections she didn't have. Laws named after her, support systems, whistleblower hotlines, the foundation she inspired. I'd have resources she never had. How could I not use them? How could I let her sacrifice be for nothing?" And there, in that simple conversation between two college freshmen, was perhaps the truest measure of Audrey Ramirez's legacy. She died trying to expose corruption, but her death had created a world where the next person who saw something wrong had better tools, stronger protections, more support. Each generation stood on the shoulders of the one before, and Audrey's shoulders, though she'd been gone for 35 years, remained strong enough to hold them all. The next morning, as the sun rose over Millfield, Ohio, it illuminated the bronze statue in the town square. 35 years of weather had given the metal a patina that somehow made Audrey's determined expression even more powerful. Fresh flowers lay at the base. They appeared every morning, left by anonymous admirers who wanted to ensure she was never forgotten. In the old Henderson's building, Now the Ramirez Legal Aid Clinic. Attorneys were already at their desks, preparing to help clients who couldn't afford justice on their own. The clinic had helped thousands over the years, all of them receiving free legal services funded by the foundation and by donations from people who believed in Audrey's vision. And in a cemetery on the edge of town, two graves side by side bore the names Rosa and Audrey Ramirez. A young family was visiting, a mother bringing her daughter to pay respects, to teach her about courage and justice and the importance of speaking truth. "Who were they, Mama?" the little girl asked, tracing the letters on Audrey's headstone. "They were heroes," her mother said simply. "Audrey saw something wrong and tried to fix it. Rosa made sure the world never forgot. Because of them, a lot of people are safer, freer, better protected. Because of them, people like you and me have more opportunities. I want to be like them," the little girl declared, with the absolute certainty only children possess. Her mother smiled, tears in her eyes. "Then speak up when you see injustice. Help people who need it. Never be afraid to tell the truth, even when it's hard. Do that, and you will be like them." As they walked away from the graves, hand in hand, the morning light caught the words engraved on Audrey's headstone one more time. "The truth always matters, even when it's costly." 35 years later, that truth still echoed, and it would keep echoing generation after generation, as long as there were people brave enough to listen and courageous enough to speak. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.